Hello world, thank you for watching video 5 of our pyramid series, and I appreciate that you were able to stick with us this long. I hope you've enjoyed it so far, but if you haven't seen videos 1 through 4, please go back and watch them before you watch this video, or this won't make any sense to you. As we said in our previous video, most of the things happening in this video occur simultaneously to our previous video. However, we split them up just so it's easier for you to understand while you're watching.
If you remember from video 3, when they blew the head off the original Sphinx, this not only allowed them to realize that air is a problem when trying to control water, causing them to create the air relief system known as the Great Pyramid, it also showed them their plan to force feed Morris through the original pipeline was flawed, and they needed to come up with a new way of backfeeding Morris that wouldn't cause undue pressure to their system.
If you don't believe us about the importance of separating air from a water main system, I'm going to post a link to a video in the description below of water main systems today exploding due to pressurized air trapped in them.
Everything we are about to describe to you is 100% necessary for this theory to work the way we are going to describe. And amazingly, we aren't adding anything to the system that wasn't actually built or described by Herodotus. Before we tell you what they did, we need to tell you what they wanted to accomplish. They wanted access to the water and fish from Aswan during the Akhet season. Use the water to raise Morris's elevation and keep the fish for food. Then, after the Akhet season, reverse the system and allow Morris to provide fish for the rest of the year, all while maintaining complete control of how much water came out of their system at any given moment. They were able to do this with the Sphinx during the Akhet season for possibly thousands of years by using the doors like we described in our second video. But the higher elevation of the water in Aswan proved to be more difficult than they originally anticipated.
Now, in order for the Egyptians to get into their system to renovate it, they would have needed to drain the entire system out almost completely. So we speculate what they would have done is excavated a pipeline to an area in Egypt close to the Mediterranean to take advantage of the lowest elevation they could obtain. They would have also kept a block close by to use as a plug when they were ready to use their system again. They understood that they didn't want to connect their system to salt water, so we believe they would have dug a pipeline from here all the way to roughly a mile from the Mediterranean. Then, after the Akhet season ended, their system could drain out almost completely, all the way to a couple of feet above sea level. Lake Morris would drain until its elevation lowered below the elevation of the hole. Then that would stop flowing as well, and they would have a dry pipeline to crawl into and begin fixing.
We can use Herodotus to back up this claim in case you're wondering where this evidence came from. In describing Lake Morris, Herodotus says, the lake, being 450 miles long, extends all the way to the seaboard of Egypt.
Now that they can get into their system, they placed a block in the tunnel connecting the Sphinx to the pyramid to completely separate the two systems again. They realized that this connection was a huge error and they needed to undo their mistake.
They then wanted to dig a tunnel from the bottom pipeline up to the Giza Plateau to gain access for the water and fish that were in it. But they wanted to place a door on this hole to control the amount of water flowing out as well. And the only way to do this was to ensure that no water would enter it.
No air would ever enter this.
No air would ever enter it. Because as you would have learned by now, compressed air in a water main system can cause a catastrophe.
So there is a very simple way that they would have done this without using any modern technology. Air naturally rises up in a body of water until it eventually separates from the water completely. If you've ever been underwater in a pool and blown out, you've seen this concept in action. So keeping that in mind, all they would have to do is dig straight down, cut across, then finally daylight up on the Giza Plateau. It wouldn't matter how far they traveled when they were digging horizontally, because once they dug straight down, no air would enter this pipeline. All the air in the system would stay in the chamber above it until it entered the air relief system known as the Great Pyramid.
Now, there's two things that are important for you to understand. Up until now in our series, there have only been 2 layers of underground pipelines, but we have just created a 3rd layer. A few videos ago, we mentioned that there are 3 layers underground in Egypt. They are called the Osiris Chambers. But something you might find interesting is that when we originally began drawing our diagram behind you and attempted to put this puzzle together, the only way our theory would fully make sense is if we created 3 layers, like the one we just described, to remove the air from the pipeline. We only knew of the first 2 from Herodotus, so we began writing our videos putting in a 3rd layer in hopes that it might spark an Egyptologist to investigate for an additional layer. But when we contacted one in Egypt, he informed us they have already found a 3rd chamber, corroborating our assumption.
The second thing you need to recognize is something that we said in our first video. We found a lot of new information about the pyramid when we went to Egypt. One of those things was roughly half a dozen large holes that extend straight down from the Giza Plateau to the lowest chamber underground. They are roughly 10 foot square and right next to the causeway of the middle pyramid, Khafre's pyramid. You have probably never heard about these holes. Even us, having been there and seen them with our own eyes, can't find a description about them online. So here's a picture if you don't believe us. We've only drawn 1 hole to represent this, but there are roughly half a dozen in real life.
Now, finally, the last thing they created is a trough in front of the Sphinx with a wall in front of it connecting to the natural limestone around it. They then placed a door at the bottom of this wall. If you go to Egypt, you'll notice there's a large structure on the Sphinx south side, clearly made with waterproof precision in mind. This structure is thought to have been a ceremonial room. There are also remnants of this structure extending in front of the Sphinx across to the north side. We speculate this was all one wall at the time of the pyramid. And if it was ever used as a ceremonial room, it was converted many years later after the system stopped functioning. Now, if you look at the diagram of the tunnels under the Sphinx, you will see a large trough in front of it that stands there today filled with sand. It's important that you know this because we aren't just making things up. Everything we're describing actually exists. Now, finally, what they would have needed to do is block off their drain pipe to allow the system to function properly.
Finally, as promised, here is how their entire system functioned once it was completed. During the Akhet season, water would flow into the pipeline at Aswan. As water flowed past this hole leading to the 3rd chamber, only water would flow down into it. All the air in the pipeline would remain in the middle chamber and travel to the pyramid and exit the air relief chamber. If you're unsure how this would work, please rewatch our previous video where we describe how this would happen in detail. Water would rise up and begin flowing out of this hole into the causeway, bringing with it a large amount of fish. Men could stand on the sides of the causeway and grab as many fish as they could during this time. As water continued to flow, it would fill the area surrounding the Sphinx. What water did is actually backfeed Lake Moeris. You'll notice that the top of the wall is above the elevation of Lake Moeris. What this did is allow water to, without pressure, gravity feed Lake Moeris and raise its elevation.
As Herodotus said, water flowed out of the hole and traveled south for 6 months into the lake. The daily take of fish brought in 20 manu to the royal treasury.
Any excess water around the Sphinx would rise up to the top of the wall before flowing over and back to the Nile. And we believe the elevation of the wall's spillway coincides with the middle of the Sphinx's neck, explaining why the body of the Sphinx today is extremely eroded, but its head is not.
After the Akhet season ended and the water stopped flowing into the pipeline at Aswan, water would continue draining until it balanced out with the lowest openings in their system. This would have been the Osiris Chambers near the causeway of the 2nd pyramid. When water finally stopped flowing out of these holes, the water surrounding the Sphinx would continue backfeeding Moeris until the 2 bodies of water balanced out and the water stopped flowing. Then all they would need to do is open the door at the bottom of the wall. This would essentially reverse the process. Water could begin flowing out of Moeris, providing them fish for the remainder of the year.
As Herodotus said, water flowed north for 6 months out of the lake, and the daily take of fish brought in a silver talent to the royal treasury.
I know that's a lot to comprehend in such a short time span. So if you're fuzzy on anything we described, we recommend that you either re-watch this video or, as we mentioned in a previous video, post a comment asking us what the heck we're talking about, and we may have to make another video explaining something in more detail. We tried to be as clear as possible, but we understand it's still confusing.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and you will share it with your friends. Please join us for our next video where we finally solve the reason of the mass exodus in ancient Egypt. Not to be confused with the story of Moses in the Bible. We're referring to the drought at 2200 BC.
Thank you.